So today's topic, as the webinar is titled, is about urban forests and fire. It's not necessarily about field treatments or hazard reduction or wildland-urban interface, which are topics we're really familiar with when we think about this. But again, the focus is on what happens to urban forests after they're affected by wildfire. And this is a really common recurring problem we've been having here, not only in the West, but now other regions and other cities, not only in North America, Europe, and Australia, but other parts of the world are experiencing. So we'll try to combine some lessons learned from here in California, from Oregon, from Colorado, and try to get a little bit more awareness and knowledge about these events. So wildfires are increasing in urban areas. As you see from these images on the left, they're affecting highly populated, highly dense land uses and covers in cities and in communities. More recently, some leading fire scientists from the Forest Service have proposed a new concept called urban fires. That is, wildfires are causing urban fires that are now affecting communities and urban forests. And as we're increasingly being affected by these events, we need more information and more knowledge. So I'll talk about it from a research perspective. Mike will talk about it from his experiences having gone through one of these events. And then Tara and Igor will provide some information we're developing for these communities that have been affected by fire. So as these communities are affecting, as these fires are affecting communities, different types of demographics are now being affected. Here in this slide, we see some headlines from a few years ago reflecting this new reality that new communities, new demographics are being now affected by fire. And it's just not here in the United States and in California, but as that headline down at the very bottom in Spanish says, inequality, the social contrast in Chile that caused wildfire. Again, this is a type of event that's now affecting different types of communities throughout the world. So when we talk about fire and we talk about urban forest, we fall into these management approaches that are where we gain our experiences and apply them. We often think of fire in the context in the left, in more wildland, rural, getting into the suburban areas. But as we're experiencing here in California and elsewhere, now these wildfires are affecting highly urbanized areas. And the way we address these problems are through two sets of practices. One is the fire management and wildland-urban interface body of knowledge, but also from the urban forestry. So on the left, we recommend that all vegetation is removed around zones or defensible spaces around homes. However, this is often not acceptable to homeowners, and ecologically, removing all vegetation down to mineral soil is not an option. However, on the right side, we have the urban forestry practices that we've applied often from lessons and science developed in the eastern United States or in more moist, high precipitation areas where we want leafy vegetation around homes, big trees right next to homes to maximize shading, reduce energy use, maximize property values, provide all those benefits. However, in these fire-prone landscapes, we really can't have that. So what do we need? How do we find that middle ground? That's what we're trying to do with these experiences we've gained. So the way we've been managing these events in these urban areas and these fire-affected urban forests is through traditional wildland-urban interface and forestry practices, where it's one homeowner, there are large tracts of land, there's few species we have to deal with, and there's generally buy-in from the homeowner. That's more traditional wildland-urban interface approach to fire. However, on the right side, we see that these new communities and urban areas that are being affected are highly populated. There's multiple landowners. There's new species. Different communities are now being affected. And this isn't just, again, in California, Australia, or Southern Europe, but now tropical coastal areas have been affected by wildfire. And even in Chile, there was a wildfire last few weeks that killed over 100 people. So new types of urban ecosystems are experiencing wildfire. If we focus here on California, we see this graph that shows the number of urban communities that have been affected by wildfire over the last 10 years. So you see a statistically linear increase. We also see these two graphs that statewide. The solid line are fire-affected urban census tracts. The dotted lines are census tracts throughout the state of California. What we see is that these communities are generally more affluent, but, and that's expected as we've seen through other studies. However, we now see that in these fire-affected census tracts, renters are now being affected. And if we focus on specific regions here in California, we see that new demographic groups, for example, in the coastal sage areas, that's southern coastal California, Asian Americans are being increasingly affected. In far north central California, Hispanic groups that weren't traditionally affected by wildfire are now being affected. So new communities are being affected. If we focus on urban forest, we have 3 case studies. Ventura in southern coastal California, Santa Rosa, north central California, and Paradise, California. That's in north inland California near the Sierra Madres. In these graphs, we see 2 lines, a solid green line and a dotted dashed line. The green line are fire-affected neighborhoods and their tree cover over 5 years. And the dotted line shows adjacent neighborhoods that were not affected by wildfire. The red arrow shows when the fire occurred. So we see 3 different dynamics for these 3 different communities. In Ventura, we see that immediately after the fire, there was a decrease in tree cover. But 2 years after that wildfire event, tree cover recovered to similar levels as adjacent neighborhoods that weren't affected by wildfire. And we also see the same dynamic in Santa Rosa, that immediately after the wildfire, there was a decrease in tree cover, but it soon gained enough tree cover to be similar to adjacent non-fire affected neighborhoods. However, in Paradise, we see that fire affected neighborhoods are decreasing their tree cover continuously over time relative to adjacent non-fire affected neighborhoods whose tree cover has really not changed. So what can we learn from these 3 case studies? Different urban ecosystems, different urban forests have different resilience. Some recover rapidly, others don't. These dynamics are very specific to communities. So when we talk about national level trends, state level trends, even county level trends, they often don't apply. Every community specific, every community responds differently. And these trends in tree cover are indicators for ecosystem services, but they could also be indicators for other socio-ecological processes such as displacement. So ongoing research to better understand these dynamics and these events, we're evaluating defensible space zones using high resolution tree cover and mapping vegetation type, greenness, and proximity to homes. The University of California, Davis, Professor Alessandro Sola, Ryan Klein, and Masha Clark from the University of Florida are going back to some of these communities and doing monitoring studies on how different species performed while they're developing tree risk hazard assessments. They'll also be doing a homeowner survey to see what kind of pre-fire maintenance was going on in these urban forests before the fire. Dr. Natalie Van Doorn, Dr. Stacy Jury from our research station are doing flammability studies with urban tree and shrub species. And then Tara Nigoro later presents some material we've developed from these studies that can be used by communities after they're affected by wildfire. So communities will rebuild as they're affected by wildfire. The question we have is, what information do they need and how we can get this information to them so that they can restore their tree cover to again maximize their ecosystem services. As we've learned, this no longer is a wildland-urban interface problem, but now we're experiencing unique disturbances, unique processes that we're trying to learn. So the question is, what communities do we want pre and post fire?